All right, y'all. Welcome to Green Card Guys TV. We have a special guest today. Her name's Nicole Vele. She does something that is way over my head, and we love to invite guests that has expertise in other areas that can benefit y'all in the audience watching this, especially for those who have their own business and want to get into government work. It's been a hot topic lately, and so let's welcome Nicole Vele. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm definitely looking forward to our discussion on how I and Holland and Hart can help individuals who are interested in becoming GovCons be successful.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for your time. We met sometime last year through a networking group, and you and I've hit it off and love sharing information. And so, with that, I realized, yeah, let's get you on. So, you told me that the government is the biggest buyer. Can you elaborate more on how you help with regard to that?
Yeah, so I mean, anybody who's paying attention to the crazy budget talks, right? You know that the government has quite a bit of money that it expends every year in different appropriations, whether it's for healthcare or whether it's for military spending, etc. Between military agencies and civilian agencies, everybody's got different requirements. This administration is kind of consolidating a lot of those requirements into the GSA. And so the GSA, you'll see, will probably come to the forefront in terms of managing a lot of those requirements. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the government has to buy stuff in order to meet the mission that it's, purporting to try to achieve or accomplish. So for those of you that provide products and services, construction, etc., there's really kind of no limit to what the government buys, right? If it's being produced, the government is likely buying it.
So how does this work, Nicole? Is it always a bidding process? Like the government wants 1,000 widgets, and so of course you need to have the capabilities of producing those widgets.
So sometimes, yeah, I mean, ultimately at the end of the day, if you're going to win whatever the actual contract is, you need to be able to actually perform the contract. So that would be one of the main ways I would be helping folks right from the jump. If you don't think that you can produce 1,000 widgets, let's not bid on that contract. But not everything has to be, a huge endeavor. There are certain contracts that are sole source, so if you happen to produce an item or a product that only you produce, and the government really needs it, they can sole source it to you. They have sole source authorities. They also, at least traditionally, have done set asides for small businesses. So certain small businesses, whether it's a veteran owned small business or a women owned small business, they've had different requirements to try to boost their participation in the federal government process. And so businesses that can meet those designations typically have certain amount of contracts each year that are set aside that they only are allowed to compete for. And then you have your typical sealed bid process and your negotiated procurement process. Commercial items, everybody kind of gets the idea about commercial items, right? The government wants to be able to benefit from, I'm just going to use an example. Pick your favorite box store, right? They want to be able to do the exact same thing with a government credit card. They want to be able to go in and get the same things right off the shelf, just like you and I.
So I always thought that, dating back to thinking about the creation of the internet, the government had their own version or first dibs. So yeah, certainly I can appreciate that the government is the biggest buyer. So if there's anyone out there that's watching this and you have a business that is usually like direct to consumer, you might want to consider if you can be direct to the government as well and diversify your portfolio. Now, Nicole, so there's been something going on, something called a DOGE. Apparently, it's called Department of Government Efficiency. Even with what's going on with that, do you still recommend people to consider government contracting?
I think considering government contracting is always a worthwhile endeavor, regardless of what your business type is. As you mentioned, most businesses want to have a decent amount of variety so that they can withstand different changes in climate. And traditionally, the government has been very good at making sure it pays its bills. Doesn't mean that there aren't delays, doesn't mean that there aren't hiccups in the system when you have administration changes and priorities change on high, but the government still needs to buy things in order to make it run and in order to achieve its objectives. So for those folks who have the capacity to be able to withstand some of the sea changes that do traditionally happen in big government, it's a good place to be if ultimately you can sell what
Mhm.
they need.
So the law firm that you're at, the Holland Hart, do your services, it sounds like, of course, to help prepare the package, the bidding process, but with what's going on with the Department of Government Efficiency, do you help on these scenarios of the kind of a little bit turbulent times?
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll see a lot of folks right now, in particular, who have gotten stop work notices or termination notices for the government's convenience. And most of the time, you're going to see people either needing to submit termination settlement proposals, requests for equitable adjustments, claims, etc. And we absolutely help folks do all of those things.
Normally, what sounds like what you do on a normal basis, day to day, is to help your client, the company, to essentially help produce or provide items to the government, right, or services. And but in this unique situation now, you're having to present an argument to the government, right, that you want to continue the contract, essentially, that you want performance on both sides, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you have a change in administration, you're gonna see a change in overall policy. That's not abnormal. And so, what you have to do if you want to make sure you maintain the contracts that you've already been awarded is speak the language of the new administration and make sure that you can align the services and products that you provide to the government in a narrative that allows you to show how you meet the current administration's objectives. And I think that's just common sense, regardless of who's at the helm.
Hmm.
You want to make sure that, if the government needs to perform a certain task or wants to push forward a specific agenda, that the people who are supplying the goods and services can actually meet those needs.
Okay, that's great to hear because in my situation, our practice area of immigration, we're also, of course, helping our client, the company, or the individual, but most of the time, it's the government is pushing back on us. Like that seems to be default. They're always pushing back. So that's interesting. Okay, so we briefly talked about GovCon a few weeks ago, and in the perspective, our clientele here at Green Card Guys, we have some clients who are abroad, right, and they want to start a business in America. They may likely already have one outside America. So they want to expand another location or branch in America. Let's say they don't have the visa yet, but so they're not physically in America. Maybe they could have a tourist visa, B1, B2 visa in America, but do they need to physically be present in the US at the time of, let's say, submitting that bid? Is there any rules like that?
You asked kind of an interesting and complex question. The key about submitting a bid is a little bit different than actually getting registered as a government contractor. And so typically what you will see is you'll see a lot of foreign companies, regardless of where they're headquartered, and they may have a United States presence already. And typically they will register in sam.gov and get their unique entity identifier number. That's what gets everybody started in the government process. And then submission is really about where is the agency that's has the requirement, where are they asking the submission to go. So it isn't necessarily that the person submitting it has to have boots on the ground in the United States, but depending on what that specific requirement is asking for, they may have to have a presence at least, whether it's them specifically or, you know, a business colleague presence that they can point to or direct the government to be able to correspond, etc. But each requirement has its own specifics, so it's a little bit difficult to kind of drill down and say like
Okay.
more broadly, like you have to be this because everything's a little different.
Sounds like it may depend on the bid or
Yeah,
agency. Okay. I don't know. This might delve into legal advice, so you can, of course, pull back if you need to. But how does a bidder or a company show that they can fulfill the project? Maybe it's like they need to have a a lease or a contract with a facility to be able to manufacture these widgets?
That is a good question. There's a set of factors, at least right now, under the current federal acquisition regulation in 4.9 that shows responsibility determinations, and that there's a whole list of things that the government contracting officer is supposed to look for in your business to identify whether or not they believe you are a responsible offeror. That's the language that they use, right? Are you responsible? Do you have the money in order to be able to perform the contract of the magnitude you're submitting a bid or a proposal for? Do you have the actual assets to be able to execute the contract? Can you show that? There's a lot more that goes into it, and I don't need to bore anybody with
Yeah,
all
no
those
worries.
details on the side. But at the end of the day, there's a list that the government is looking for. And
Okay.
so long as you can provide them with that information, that
Okay,
at
good.
least gives the
So that
government
make it a
enough
little easier
information. Yeah.
to some extent. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, of course, a question that people will likely definitely want to know is most people think, of course, America is a world superpower, but in terms of when it does it translate in terms of efficiency or timeliness of payment, the compensation to the bidder?
So I think in terms of payment, that's one thing that people need to actually be able to manage quite a bit when they're dealing with federal contracts in particular. And most of the time is because it's not set up to like give you advance payments per se. It's almost always set up as a reimbursement type model. And so, you could win $1 billion contract, but that doesn't mean you get $1 billion in your bank account at the time of award. It means you have something that you have to perform for the government or deliver to the government. And depending on what you've agreed upon with the government, will sort of dictate how you get paid for those things, whether it's you have to submit an invoice or whether you're getting paid in sort of like mile markers or increments as you go throughout your project. So
Mhm.
it just kind of depends a little bit what the agreement is. And then, as is true with anything in the government, in order to get paid, you have to actually submit a proper invoice. And so you have to, even if everything is going exactly right in your contract, if the information in the invoice isn't what it needs to be, right? Your business name is different, your address is different, it doesn't have the information that it should have in it, it will slow down your ability to get paid, right? Because those invoices may get kicked back and then you'll have to fix those items before you can resubmit.
Sounds like you're speaking from experience. You help your clients
Yeah.
get out of a jam. My goodness.
Yeah, it can be difficult, and sometimes that's the hardest part is just sort of learning how to navigate through the federal system, because just like anything else, it's a process, and once you are familiar with it, it becomes easier. But at the outset, it can be very frustrating for folks who have never had to do it before.
It sounds like what you said earlier when we did started the show here that that the Doge is trying to streamline it. That's the intent, right? To go. Did you say maybe you told me a different time ago that to the GSA? Is that it?
Yeah, so consolidating the procurement. So there was an executive order that was passed not that long ago by President Trump that, or I shouldn't say passed, I guess he signed. And ultimately, at the end of the day, what it says is, hey, we're trying to create efficiencies, eliminate redundancies. So what we're gonna do is instead of having, you know, multiple different contracting shops for each agency that's out there. We're going to consolidate things as much as we can into the GSA. At least with respect to civilian agencies right now, it
Mhm.
remains to be seen how defense spending will occur. But right now, what we know is that for several civilian agencies, they're going to be condensed. Their buying will be condensed into the GSA.
Okay. Well, hopefully that helps you and your clients out a bit more.
I think maybe it has the potential to in the long run, but just like anything else, anytime there's a change, it takes a little bit of time to figure out, okay, what are the
Right.
new rules? How does this process work? How's the agency going to actually behave now that it's got a lot more work? some in this case, we also have fewer folks at the helm,
Mhm.
since the government is also streamlining the number of employees it has.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, it may take a little bit before it levels out and we have a process in place that people feel like
Right.
they know how to navigate well.
Right. So some transitions can have a little bump in the road. Okay. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it seems like long term it'll be supposed to was be effective, like if more efficient for y'all. So let's say someone reviews sam.gov and they're like, this bid looks great, but I believe I can fulfill the product or the perform the contract. And let's say it's 30 days from the deadline. Is that like a decent amount of time where they could, for example, contact you or of course preferred may need a 90-day on ramp, I guess you can say, to prep the package?
Okay, so it depends. It's gonna depend, right? Everybody hates the lawyer answer, but the reality is it's true. If you're talking to me about a micro purchase that the government needs to make, 30 days is obviously way more than enough time. But if you're talking to me about, trying to procure a massive weapon system, like you're trying to be the next F-35, 30 days is not it. You're not going to be ready. You're not even going to be close to ready. So
Right.
that would just be
Mhm.
setting you up for failure. And then of
Right.
course, those are two extreme examples, and there's obviously a whole lot that's in between. So
Mhm.
I'm gonna stick with my answer on this one, John. That it depends what the requirement is. Where, like, is this a sophisticated contractor, or is this somebody who's just trying to get spun up for the very first time?
Right.
All of that matters, because if you don't have the technical staff to help put these things together, and or examples that you've used before that you can kind of pull from and help put it together, it's going to get complicated quickly.
No, that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, even us, immigration practice, the more time we have, we prefer. Try not to get too much into politics, but are there certain countries that the United States generally does not do business with, like in terms of foreign national, even if they're here on a visa?
So again, it's going to depend. There are obviously different countries that have different restrictions to them. Again, it depends. Are we talking about selling to a civilian agency versus the Department of Defense? A little bit different there,
Mhm.
and et cetera. But I think most people understand that, like, selling to China is going to be a little bit more difficult. Selling to Russia, obviously,
Mhm.
same. Selling to North Korea, uh, Iran,
Mhm.
countries that traditionally the United States has had conflict with will
Right.
will have greater challenges. But that doesn't mean that there's no possibility. Like, for example, I've seen several researchers in particular who, have been foreign nationals that do
Mhm.
work, or at least have in the past done work, research work, etc., and gotten grants and other things to be able to do work for the United States government. So
Hmm.
it's
Okay.
definitely getting harder. It's becoming more streamlined in that respect, but
Mhm.
I guess I say never, and always check with a GovCon professional for your specific circumstance, because there's no one size fits all answer all the time.
Right. So it sounds like to, I guess, to maybe if I can, lawyers like to rephrase questions. That's what we're trained to do. But maybe what about this scenario? Like, is there have there been contracts bidded out to companies that the ownership there's not a percent of ownership or shareholder to a U.S. citizen? Is that still possible?
So if I'm thinking, if I understand your question right, like, are there like foreign ownership and interest controls, controlling interest in organizations, and if there's no American citizen anywhere in the chain, is that a problem? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah, at least in the ownership command.
Yeah, I mean, it can potentially be a problem.
Okay.
Can I tell you that? I mean, the thing is, not every foreign national has the same concerns. Every country
It
has
depends on the
different
country, maybe.
different concerns, right?
Hmm.
Like I said, certain countries that are have traditionally been our allies, things are a little bit different in terms of how easy or difficult it is.
Hmm.
And again, you need to make sure, at the end of the day. you definitely want to make sure you're consulting with an attorney who
Hmm.
has a great deal of familiarity in that area to help you navigate the process correctly. Because what you don't want to do is make an incorrect certification or representation to the government,
Oh,
and
yeah,
have it become problematic for you on the back
right.
end.
Don't. No one wants to get banned for a
No, no one wants
mistake.
to get no one wants to get banned, or suspended, debarred, have their contracts terminated for default,
Right.
and but even worse than quote unquote the corporate death penalty, nobody wants to have civil or criminal liability attach either. Like that's no fun. So
Sounds like we got someone here, y'all. We got someone here. Nicole can help you out, get you to prevent these situations in the first place, and help y'all conduct due diligence before you file that bid.
yeah,
Sounds good, Nicole. So we're gonna down below in the description box will be, I believe, the website of Nicole's law firm or any possible contact information. So if y'all need this help, even if you're watching this 1 year later, 2 years later, consider contacting Nicole. She can definitely help you out. Now, Nicole, just to wrap up, do you have any takeaways here? There's a lot you already shared, and thank you so much.
yeah, no, I mean, I think at the end of the day, what's really important for folks to think about, if you are not in the government contracts game in the United States, it's beneficial to talk to a GovCon professional early so that you can build your trust with them and have the opportunity to have them learn you, learn your business, be prepared in advance for what you can expect. And then, that gives you the ability to identify whether or not your current company has any gaps or deficiencies before you even get started, before they become problems. Shore them up, get yourself ready, and then that person can also help you be proactive with your business development. And then ultimately what you hope for, right, is to protect the awards that you do
Mhm.
get from things like bid protests, et cetera, right? We want to make
Mhm.
sure that when you do get the award, you get to keep it.
That's right. Yeah, you don't want to get canceled.
No, no,
That,
definitely don't want to get canceled.
that seems to be a popular word this decade or so. So, Nicole, thank you so much. We'd love to have you on in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Enjoyed our chat.
Thanks, everyone.